The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, a day of muted grey skies and persistent drizzle that mirrored the landscape of Ethan's life. It was not a simple card in an envelope. It was a box, thick and cream-coloured, tied with a silver ribbon that felt far too festive for the contents he knew it must hold. His hands trembled slightly as he slid the ribbon off, the silk whispering over the heavy cardstock. Inside, nestled on a bed of synthetic satin, was a heavy, embossed invitation. The letters were scripted in elaborate, swirling silver ink, announcing the union of Chloe and Mark. Chloe, the woman who had shared his home, his bed, and his dreams for 10 agonizing years, was marrying someone else. The date was set for a month away at a venue known for its staggering expense and long waiting list, the Celestial Gardens, a place they had once idly dreamed of visiting but never affording. But it was the small, handwritten note tucked into a corner of the box that twisted the knife.
"Ethan," it began in Chloe's familiar sharp handwriting, "I know this is sudden, but I truly want you to be there. It would mean the world to me to see you celebrate our new beginning. Please come and wish us well." It was a lie, a beautifully crafted, venomous lie. Every word was a barb designed to inflict maximum pain. She did not want his well wishes. She wanted a spectacle. She wanted him there as a prop, a living ghost of her discarded past, a testament to how far she had upgraded. He could picture it perfectly. Him, standing alone in his ill-fitting old suit while she glided by in a cloud of white lace, her arm linked with that of her new, successful husband. She wanted her friends to whisper, to point at the sad, pathetic ex-husband she had so wisely left behind. It was a performance of cruelty, and he had been cast in the lead role of the fool. He sank onto his worn sofa, the springs creaking like an old church door under his weight.
The small apartment felt colder, emptier. It was the same apartment they had shared, but now it was stripped of her presence, of her vibrant, demanding energy. All that remained were the ghosts of their arguments, the echoes of her disappointment. He looked at the name again, Mark Peterson. Beneath his name, in smaller, proud letters, was his title and company, Senior Vice President, Innovate Dynamics. Innovate Dynamics. The name was familiar, a distant bell ringing in the vast, complex cathedral of his business dealings. A slow, cold feeling began to spread through Ethan's chest, replacing the hot sting of humiliation. It was a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to experience in years. It was the quiet hum of power. He pulled out his phone, his fingers moving with a newfound purpose. He did not look up the man. He did not need to. He navigated to a secure, encrypted messaging app and typed a single name. David. "I need a full workup on a man named Mark Peterson," he wrote. "An employee at Innovate Dynamics." The reply was almost instantaneous. On it, "Any particular reason for the deep dive on one of our own?" Ethan looked at the silver-scripted invitation lying on his coffee table, a declaration of war disguised as a peace offering. "He's getting married," Ethan typed back, a grim, humorless smile touching his lips for the first time in months. "And he was foolish enough to invite me to the wedding." The memories of their marriage were a tapestry, woven with threads of her ambition and his sacrifice. When they met, Ethan was a brilliant but unknown software engineer with a dream. He had a vision for a new kind of data compression algorithm that could revolutionize the industry. Chloe was drawn to his passion, to the fire in his eyes that promised a future of greatness. She believed in his potential, or rather, in the lifestyle his potential could one day afford her. "We'll be so rich, Ethan," she used to say, her eyes gleaming. "We'll have a house with a view of the ocean and a garage full of cars." He had poured everything into his startup. He sold his car, cashed in his small inheritance from his grandparents, and worked 18-hour days from their cramped spare bedroom. For the first few years, Chloe played the part of the supportive wife. She would bring him coffee, listen to his technical ramblings with a patient smile, and tell their friends how proud she was of her genius husband. But as the years dragged on and the promised riches failed to materialize, her patience wore thin. Her support curdled into resentment. "When is this big break going to happen, Ethan?" she would ask, her voice laced with an accusatory edge. "My friends are all buying houses, going on European vacations, and what are we doing? We're eating instant noodles so you can afford another server." Her world was a reflection in the polished surface of social media. Her happiness was measured by the envy of others. She saw her friends posting photos from Bali and Paris, showing off designer bags and new cars. She saw her life as a failure, a string of missed opportunities and sacrifices made for a dream that was not her own. Ethan tried to explain the complexities, the near misses, the slow, grinding progress of building something from nothing. "We're so close, Chloe," he would plead. "The technology is sound. We just need the right investor, the right partner." But she had stopped listening. She started spending more time with her successful friends, the wives of bankers and corporate lawyers. She came home smelling of expensive perfume and dissatisfaction. Then she met Mark. He was everything she thought she wanted. He was handsome in a generic, corporate way, wore expensive suits and drove a German sports car. He worked at Innovate Dynamics, a flashy mid-tier tech firm known more for its marketing than its innovation. Mark loved to talk about his stock options, his quarterly bonuses, and his importance to the company. He was condescending and arrogant, and he looked at Ethan with a mixture of pity and contempt. "So you're the startup guy," Mark had said once. At a dinner Chloe had forced Ethan to attend. "Still tinkering away in your garage, are we? It's a tough world out there. Sometimes you just have to know when to cut your losses and get a real job." Chloe had laughed along with him, a sharp, cruel sound that shattered something deep inside Ethan. He saw the truth in that moment. She was not just disappointed in their life, she was ashamed of him. The end came swiftly after that. She announced she was leaving him, that she couldn't live like this anymore. There was no sadness in her eyes, only a cold, hard relief. She packed her things, taking everything of value, leaving behind only the furniture that was too much trouble to move and the man she had deemed worthless. What she never knew, what he had never told her, was that his first startup, the one he had been tinkering away on, had not failed. It had been acquired quietly and for a staggering sum by a massive tech conglomerate 2 years before she left. The deal was sealed under a strict non-disclosure agreement, a common practice to prevent market speculation. Ethan had not become a salaried employee. He had become a ghost, a silent partner, a man with a fortune so vast it was almost abstract. He had wanted to wait, to build something even bigger, something that was entirely his own, before he told her. He had wanted to surprise her, to hand her the world she had always craved, to prove that her faith in him had not been misplaced. But her faith had evaporated long before his check cleared. So he remained silent. He let her believe he was a failure. He watched her walk away, her head held high, convinced she was escaping a sinking ship for a luxury yacht. He used his newfound capital not to buy fancy cars or ocean view houses, but to build a new empire, a silent one. He created Orion Holdings, a discreet holding company with a deliberately boring name. Through Orion, he began acquiring smaller tech firms, businesses with potential that were being mismanaged or undervalued. He bought them through layers of shell corporations, his name never appearing on a single document. His lead counsel and most trusted friend, David Chen, was the public face of Orion. To the world, Ethan was just a divorced, unemployed software engineer living in a cheap apartment, and one of the companies Orion Holdings had acquired just 6 months prior was a struggling firm known for its flashy marketing and mediocre products, a firm called Innovate Dynamics. The report from David arrived the next morning. It was a comprehensive digital file, encrypted and password protected. Ethan sat at his cheap kitchen table, a mug of black coffee in his hand, and began to read. The file laid out Mark Peterson's entire professional life in cold, hard data. He was a senior vice president, but his title was inflated. His department, Strategic Outreach, was a glorified marketing division responsible for schmoozing potential clients. His performance reviews were a landscape of mediocrity. He met his targets, but just barely. He was adept at taking credit for the work of his subordinates and shifting blame for his failures. He was, in short, a classic corporate drone, a man whose entire career was built on a foundation of buzzwords and bravado. The report included financial details. Mark lived well beyond his means. His salary was impressive, but his expenses were astronomical. The German sports car was leased, the luxury apartment was rented. His credit card statements showed a man desperate to project an image of wealth he did not actually possess. There were charges for $500 dinners, $1,000 bottles of wine, and weekend trips to exclusive resorts. He was living on a mountain of debt, a house of cards waiting for the slightest breeze to knock it all down. The most damning section was titled Ethics Violations. David's team had uncovered a pattern of behavior that was at best deeply unethical. Mark regularly expensed personal dinners and trips as business meetings. He had used a corporate credit card to purchase lavish gifts for Chloe, categorizing them as client retention expenses. He had even secured his current position by embellishing his resume, claiming credit for a successful project at his previous company that he had actually tried to sabotage. Ethan read every word, a cold fury building within him. This was the man Chloe had left him for, this hollow, fraudulent shell of a man. She had traded a diamond in the rough for a polished piece of glass. He closed the file and stared out the window at the rain-slicked street. The humiliation he had felt was gone, replaced by a crystalline clarity. This was not just an insult, it was an opportunity for a reckoning that was almost poetic in its perfection. He picked up his phone and called David. "I have the report," Ethan said, his voice steady and calm. "It's worse than I imagined." "He's a liability," David agreed from the other end of the line. "Honestly, Ethan, we should have flagged him during the acquisition audit. He slipped through the cracks. I can draw up termination papers immediately. We have more than enough cause." Ethan was silent for a moment, picturing the look on Chloe's face when her fiancé was unceremoniously fired just weeks before their dream wedding. It would be satisfying, yes, but it would be too quick, too merciful. "No," Ethan said slowly. "We're not going to fire him, not yet." There was a pause on the other end. "What do you have in mind?" David asked, a note of curiosity in his voice. "I'm going to the wedding, David," Ethan said. "I'm going to sit there, and I'm going to smile and watch them say their vows." "And then?" "And then," Ethan continued, a predatory chill entering his tone, "we're going to dismantle his entire world piece by piece right in front of her. We're going to turn her dream day into her worst nightmare." The strategy session took place not in a sleek corporate boardroom, but in Ethan's humble apartment. David, dressed in a tailored suit that seemed out of place against the backdrop of peeling paint and worn furniture, sat across from Ethan at the kitchen table. He had a tablet in his hand, displaying flowcharts and financial data. "The plan needs to be surgical," Ethan stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "I don't want brute force. I want elegance. I want them to feel the walls closing in, but not understand why until the very end." David nodded, his expression a mixture of professional admiration and personal concern. "I understand. We'll use their own arrogance against them. The wedding itself is the perfect stage. The first step was to amplify Mark's financial precarity. He's funding this wedding with a line of credit secured against his anticipated annual bonus," David explained, pointing to a line on the screen. "It's a high-risk, high-interest loan. The bank only approved it because Innovate Dynamics has a reputation for generous executive bonuses." "A reputation we can change," Ethan said. "Exactly. I'll draft a memo for the board of Orion Holdings. We'll announce a company-wide review of executive compensation and bonus structures across all subsidiaries, effective immediately. We'll cite market volatility and the need for fiscal responsibility. It's standard corporate language, completely untraceable to you." Ethan smiled. "The bank will get wind of that. They'll get nervous." "They'll get terrified," David corrected. "They'll likely freeze his line of credit or, at the very least, demand more collateral. Collateral he doesn't have." The next phase of the plan targeted the wedding vendors. Chloe had chosen the most expensive options available: a celebrity florist, a Michelin-starred caterer, a famous wedding photographer. "She's building a fantasy," Ethan murmured, looking at the list. "And fantasies are expensive." "Most of these high-end vendors operate on credit with their own suppliers," David pointed out. "The caterer, for example, banks with a financial institution where Orion Holdings is a significant client. A single discreet phone call from our CFO expressing concerns about the bank's portfolio of unsecured event loans will be enough to cause a panic." "They'll demand payment up front from the caterer," Ethan concluded, "and the caterer, in turn, will demand full payment from Chloe and Mark. No more deposits, the entire balance due immediately." They spent the next hour meticulously dissecting every aspect of the wedding. They mapped out a cascading series of financial tripwires, each one designed to trigger the next. The florist's rare imported orchids would be held up in customs due to a suddenly flagged shipment from a supplier whose parent company had just lost a major contract with an Orion subsidiary. The rental company providing the luxury cars for the wedding party would suddenly discover an insurance liability with Mark's credit score and cancel the booking. Each action was subtle, indirect, and buried under layers of corporate bureaucracy. It would look like a string of terrible luck, a comedy of errors. "And what about Mark himself?" Ethan asked. "The performance review is already in motion," David confirmed. "I've assigned it to our most ruthless auditor. She'll find every padded expense report, every corner he's ever cut. By the wedding day, we'll have a file on him thick enough to stop a door." "Good," Ethan said. "I want the termination letter drafted, signed, and ready to be delivered." The final piece of the plan was Ethan himself. "You're really going?" David asked, his professional facade cracking for a moment. "Are you sure you can handle that?" "I have to be there," Ethan replied, his gaze unwavering. "I need to see it. I need to see the moment the illusion shatters and she finally understands what she threw away." He stood up and walked to the window. For the first time in a year, he didn't see a failed man in the reflection. He saw a king patiently waiting to reclaim his kingdom. He had made his decision. He picked up the RSVP card that came with the invitation. With a steady hand, he ticked the box for "Will attend" and slid it into the pre-addressed, postage-paid envelope. The first domino was about to fall. From their rented penthouse apartment, Chloe and Mark were oblivious, floating on a cloud of smug satisfaction. "Can you believe he's actually coming?" Chloe shrieked with laughter, holding Ethan's RSVP card as if it were a trophy. "The nerve of him! Or maybe it's just desperation. He probably wants to see if I'll take him back after you inevitably get bored of me." Mark wrapped his arms around her waist, nuzzling her neck. Let him come. It will make our day even sweeter. Everyone will see what a winner you chose and what a loser you left behind. Their days were filled with frantic, joyful planning. Chloe spent hours on the phone with the wedding planner, demanding bigger floral arrangements, more elaborate lighting, and an even more decadent menu. Every decision was made with an audience in mind, specifically an audience of one, Ethan. Make sure the champagne is the most expensive one, she instructed the planner. I want Ethan to see the bottle and know he couldn't even afford a single glass of it. Mark, for his part, was feeling invincible. He had received a memo about a company-wide audit, but he dismissed it as corporate nonsense. It's just something the new owners are doing to look busy, he told Chloe dismissively. They're some faceless holding company. They don't care about a guy like me as long as I keep bringing in the business. He was more focused on the wedding and the image it would project. He saw it as his coronation, the moment he would finally be seen as the powerful, successful man he always believed himself to be. The first crack in their perfect facade appeared a week before the wedding. The call came from the caterer. Mr. Peterson, there's been, a situation with our suppliers, the man said, his voice strained. Our bank has unexpectedly frozen our credit line. We need the full remaining balance of your contract wired to us by the end of the day, or we won't be able to source the ingredients for your menu. Mark was stunned. What? That's outrageous. Our contract states final payment is due after the event. I know, sir, and I am deeply sorry, but my hands are tied. No funds, no food. Panic flared in Mark's chest. The remaining balance was nearly $100,000. His line of credit for the wedding was already maxed out. When he told Chloe, she exploded. What do you mean you don't have the money? She screamed, her voice shrill with disbelief. You're a senior vice president. You're supposed to be rich. I am rich, he lied, his voice cracking. It's just a temporary cash flow issue. The bank is being difficult about my bonus. It's a misunderstanding. In the end, Chloe had to liquidate a stock portfolio her parents had given her as a college graduation gift. It was her only real asset, the nest egg she had guarded for years. Watching the money drain from her account felt like a physical blow, but the thought of cancelling the caterer and facing the humiliation was far worse. You had better fix this, Mark, she warned, her eyes cold and hard. This wedding is going to be perfect. I've sacrificed enough for it. The incident planted a seed of doubt in her mind. For the first time she wondered if Mark's wealth was as substantial as he claimed. But she pushed the thought away. She had come too far to turn back now. 2 days later, the florist called. The rare orchids she had insisted on, the ones being flown in from Southeast Asia, were being held in customs. There was an issue with the supplier's import license, a sudden and inexplicable bureaucratic snag. They would not be released in time for the wedding. Chloe's carefully constructed composure shattered. She threw her phone across the room, where it hit the wall and slid to the floor with a sickening crunch. She sank onto her pristine white sofa and began to sob, not with sadness, but with pure, unadulterated rage. It felt like the universe was conspiring against her. Every perfect detail of her perfect day was unraveling. Mark tried to comfort her, but his platitudes sounded hollow. He was panicking too. He had called his bank again, trying to get an extension on his credit line, but he was met with a cold, unyielding refusal. The loan officer mentioned the new review at Innovate Dynamics and spoke in vague terms about increased risk. The house of cards was beginning to tremble. From his small apartment across town, Ethan watched the collapse from a distance. David provided him with daily updates, detailing each panicked phone call, each frantic transfer of funds. Ethan felt a grim satisfaction, a cold and precise pleasure in their mounting desperation. He maintained a facade of silence. He did not answer Chloe's texts, which had shifted in tone from gloating to oddly inquisitive, as if she were probing for information. He simply prepared. He went to a tailor and had his best suit, an old but well-made garment perfectly fitted. He bought a new shirt and a simple, elegant tie. He was not dressing to impress them. He was dressing for a funeral. The funeral of their arrogance, their cruelty, and the life they thought they had secured. On the morning of the wedding, he looked at himself in the mirror. The man looking back was not the broken, heartbroken person he had been a month ago. His eyes were clear, his posture was straight, he was calm, he was ready. The day of the wedding dawned bright and painfully beautiful. A perfect blue sky stretched over the city, a cruel mockery of the storm brewing in Chloe and Mark's lives. Ethan drove to the Celestial Gardens not in a flashy car, but in a simple, clean sedan. He handed the keys to the valet, who looked at his modest vehicle with a hint of disdain before turning his attention to the stream of luxury cars pulling up behind him. Ethan ignored him. He was a ghost here, an observer. He walked through the grand entrance, past towering floral arrangements composed of local roses and lilies, not the exotic orchids Chloe had demanded, and into the main garden where the ceremony was to take place. Guests milled about, sipping champagne and murmuring in hushed, impressed tones. They were a collection of Chloe's social climbing friends and Mark's corporate colleagues, all dressed in their finest, all projecting an air of effortless wealth. Ethan found a seat in the back row, content to be invisible. But Chloe would not allow that. She had instructed her maid of honor to find him. A woman in a tight silver dress approached him. "Ethan, Chloe would like you to sit up front." It was a command, not a request. She led him to a seat in the second row, directly behind Chloe's parents, in a spot reserved for the most honored guests. It was a place of maximum visibility. Every eye would be on him. He sat down, feeling the curious, pitying glances of those around him. He could hear their whispers. "Is that him, the ex-husband? How brave of him to come. Brave or pathetic? I can't decide." He kept his face a neutral mask, his hands resting calmly in his lap. Then the music swelled, and the ceremony began. Mark stood at the altar, looking pale and strained beneath his confident smile. He kept glancing at his phone, a nervous tic he couldn't seem to control. Then Chloe appeared at the end of the aisle, and a collective gasp went through the crowd. She was a vision in white, her dress a confection of lace and silk that must have cost a fortune. But as she walked down the aisle, her eyes scanned the crowd, and when they found Ethan, they locked onto him. Her smile widened, a triumphant, cruel curve of her lips. This was her moment. This was the scene she had replayed in her mind 1,000 times, her victory lap. Ethan met her gaze and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He would let her have this. He would let her climb to the very peak of the mountain before he kicked the foundations out from under it. The ceremony was a blur of hollow words and false promises. They recited vows they had written themselves, full of clichés about soulmates and eternal love. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Mark's kiss was less passionate and more desperate, a drowning man clinging to a raft. The reception was held in the grand ballroom, a space dripping with chandeliers and ostentatious gold trim. The mood was strained. The string quartet Chloe had booked had been replaced by a DJ after the quartet demanded a certified check up front, which Mark could not produce. The champagne was flowing, but the 5-star dinner was noticeably delayed. Ethan sat at his assigned table, making polite, meaningless conversation with distant cousins of Chloe's who clearly had no idea who he was. He saw Mark in a heated, whispered argument with the wedding planner near the ballroom entrance. The planner's face was a mask of frustration, while Mark gesticulated wildly, his face flushed. Chloe floated through the room, her smile brittle, her laughter a little too loud. She was working hard to maintain the illusion of perfection, but the effort was visible. She finally made her way to Ethan's table, her new husband in tow. "Ethan, I'm so glad you could make it," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I want you to properly meet my husband, Mark." Mark extended a hand, his grip surprisingly weak. "Good to see you again, Ethan," he said, his eyes scanning Ethan's simple suit with disdain. "No hard feelings, I hope. All's fair in love and war, right?" "None at all," Ethan replied, his voice even. "Congratulations to you both. Hope you get everything you deserve." The subtle menace in his words went right over their heads. They saw only what they wanted to see, the defeated ex offering his pathetic congratulations. "Well, we should mingle," Chloe said, already bored. "Enjoy the party. It's the least we could do for you." She swept away, dragging Mark with her, leaving Ethan alone with the weight of what was to come. The toast began. Chloe's father gave a rambling, tearful speech. The best man told a series of awkward jokes that fell flat. Then Mark took the microphone. He began by thanking everyone for coming, his voice booming with forced confidence. He spoke about his beautiful bride, his wonderful new family, and his bright future. "I've worked hard to get where I am," he declared, puffing out his chest. "At Innovate Dynamics, we believe in reaching for the stars, and I've finally found the star I want to spend my life with." As he spoke, Ethan saw David Chen enter the ballroom from a side entrance. David was not on the guest list. He was dressed in a dark, severe business suit and carried a leather briefcase. He stood by the door, his eyes scanning the room, until they met Ethan's. David gave a single sharp nod. It was time. The final act was about to begin. Just as Mark finished his speech to a smattering of polite applause, the ballroom doors swung open. It was not a waiter or a late-arriving guest. It was the venue manager, a stern-looking woman with a clipboard, flanked by two uniformed security guards. She marched directly to the head table where Chloe and Mark were sitting. A hush fell over the room. "Mr. Peterson," the manager said, her voice loud and clear in the sudden silence. "The final payment for this event was due 2 hours ago. The credit card you provided has been declined." Mark leaped to his feet, his face turning a blotchy red. "This is a mistake. Run it again." "We have run it again, sir. 4 times. It's been declined for insufficient funds. We require a wire transfer for the outstanding balance of $250,000 immediately, or we will be forced to shut down this event." The guests began to murmur, their whispers cutting through the atmosphere like a blade. Chloe stared at Mark, her face a mask of horror and disbelief. "Mark, what is she talking about? You told me you paid it." "It's a bank error, I swear," he stammered, fumbling for his phone. "I'll sort this out." But as he frantically scrolled through his banking app, his face went from red to a ghostly white. Every account was empty. His credit lines were frozen. It was in that moment of chaos, as the perfect wedding devolved into a public spectacle of financial ruin, that Ethan stood up. He walked calmly to the podium and took the microphone that Mark had just abandoned. Every eye in the room turned to him. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice calm and steady, amplified by the speakers throughout the ballroom. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ethan. I'm Chloe's ex-husband." A fresh wave of whispers rippled through the crowd. Chloe stared at him, her eyes wide with fury. "Ethan, what are you doing? Get down from there." He ignored her. "I want to offer my own toast to the happy couple," he continued, raising an imaginary glass. Chloe, you spent the last few years of our marriage telling me I wasn't enough, that I was a failure because I was more interested in building a future than in buying flashy things to impress your friends. He paused, letting his words hang in the air. And you, Mark? The night we met, you told me to get a real job. You mocked me for tinkering away on my little projects. You paraded your title, Senior Vice President of Innovate Dynamics, as proof of your superiority. He turned his gaze directly to Mark, whose face was now slick with sweat. Well, here's the thing you didn't know. While you were busy padding your expense reports and leasing cars you couldn't afford, I was busy with my own little project. He let the silence stretch, building the tension to an unbearable point. My project was a holding company called Orion Holdings, and 6 months ago, Orion Holdings acquired a struggling little tech firm, a company called Innovate Dynamics. A collective gasp went through the room. Mark looked as if he had been physically struck. He staggered back, his mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. Chloe's face had gone completely pale, the color draining from it as if a plug had been pulled. "That's right," Ethan said, his voice turning to ice. "You spent all this time trying to humiliate the man who signs your paychecks, or rather, who used to sign your paychecks." He gestured to the side of the room. "David, if you would." David Chen stepped forward, opened his briefcase, and pulled out a single, thick envelope. He walked to the head table and placed it in front of the trembling Mark. "Mark Peterson," David said, his voice resonating with legal authority, "you are hereby terminated from your position at Innovate Dynamics, effective immediately for gross misconduct, including but not limited to felony expense fraud and resume falsification. The company will be pursuing criminal charges. Your signing bonus is being clawed back, and all company assets in your possession are to be surrendered." Mark stared at the envelope, then at Ethan, his eyes filled with a dawning, uncomprehending terror. But the wedding?" Chloe whispered, her voice barely audible. "The apartment, the car." "The wedding you paid for with your own savings, Chloe," Ethan said, his voice softening with a cold, surgical pity. "The apartment whose lease was co-signed by the company is now void. The car is being repossessed as we speak. Everything you thought you had was an illusion, built on a foundation of lies and debt." He looked out at the stunned crowd. "I'm sorry to have interrupted your evening. Please enjoy enjoy yourselves. As for the bill with the venue, don't worry." He pulled a black credit card from his wallet and tossed it to the venue manager. "Put it all on this, and add a generous tip for the staff. They've had to put up with a lot tonight." Then he turned his back on the wreckage of their lives. He walked away from the podium, past the stunned guests and towards the exit. As he reached the door, he heard a sound that would stay with him forever. It was a raw, guttural scream of pure, animalistic rage and despair. It was the sound of Chloe's entire world, her carefully constructed fantasy shattering into a million irreparable pieces. Ethan did not look back. He stepped out into the cool night air, leaving the chaos behind him, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt truly, completely free. The aftermath was as swift as it was brutal. The story of the wedding disaster became the stuff of local legend, a salacious tale whispered at cocktail parties and country clubs. Chloe and Mark were socially crucified. Their names became synonymous with fraud and humiliation. Mark was arrested the following day. The evidence David's team had compiled was airtight. Faced with a mountain of proof of his expense fraud and other corporate crimes, he pleaded guilty to avoid a longer sentence. He was sentenced to 2 years in a low-security prison and ordered to pay restitution to the company he had stolen from, a debt that would follow him for the rest of his life. Chloe's fate was, in many ways, worse. She was not charged with any crime, but she was left with the social and financial ruin. She was saddled with the colossal debt from the wedding, a monument to her own hubris. The friends who had toasted her success now crossed the street to avoid her. She lost the apartment, the borrowed lifestyle, and the status she had craved more than anything. She was forced to move back in with her parents, the ultimate humiliation for a woman who had defined herself by her independence and success. She was right back where she started, only now she was burdened with debt, shame, and the bitter knowledge of what she had thrown away. Ethan, meanwhile, stepped out of the shadows. The story of his quiet, methodical revenge leaked to the business press, though he never gave an interview or confirmed the details. He was painted as a brilliant, enigmatic tycoon, a sleeping giant who had been provoked. Orion Holdings, once a name known only to a select few, became a major player in the tech world. But Ethan had no interest in the trappings of his immense wealth. He sold the portfolio of mid-tier companies, including the now restructured Innovate Dynamics, for a handsome profit. He used the capital not to buy a mansion or a fleet of supercars, but to start a foundation. The Phoenix Foundation was dedicated to providing seed funding and mentorship to young, brilliant entrepreneurs who had great ideas but lacked the resources to bring them to life. He wanted to give others the chance he had almost been denied. His office was not in a gleaming skyscraper, but in a converted warehouse in a modest part of the city. He found more joy in helping a young engineer perfect a line of code than he ever could have found at a black tie gala. He worked, he built, and he healed. One afternoon, about a year after the wedding, he was meeting with a young woman who had applied for a grant. Her name was Clara, and she had an idea for a non-profit organization that used technology to connect food banks with local restaurants to minimize waste. She was passionate, intelligent, and completely unimpressed by the rumors of his wealth. She saw him not as a billionaire but as a fellow creator, a problem solver. "Your algorithm for supply chain logistics is brilliant," he told her, genuinely impressed by her proposal. She smiled, a warm, genuine expression that reached her eyes. "Thank you. I believe technology should be used to build better communities, not just bigger bank accounts." Her words resonated with him, reflecting the philosophy he had come to embrace. As their meeting concluded, he found himself reluctant to let her go. Would you like to get some coffee sometime?" he asked, feeling a nervousness he hadn't felt in years. "We could talk more about your project." Clara's smile widened. "I'd like that very much, Ethan." They began to see each other, their relationship growing slowly, built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared values. She loved him for his mind and his kindness, for the quiet strength that lay beneath his unassuming exterior. She knew the stories about his past, but she never asked for details. His past did not define him. His present, and the good he was putting into the world, was all that mattered to her. One evening, they were walking through a park, hand in hand, when his phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. He opened it. It was from Chloe. "I heard you're seeing someone," the message read. "I hope she knows what she's getting. I hope you're happy." "You ruined my life." Ethan read the words, and for the first time, he felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no pity. Just a vast, empty distance. She was a ghost from another life, a person he no longer knew. He deleted the message without replying and put the phone back in his pocket. Clara looked at him, a question in her eyes. "Everything okay?" He looked at her kind face illuminated by the setting sun, and he smiled. "Everything is perfect." He had learned a hard lesson. True wealth isn't measured in dollars or displayed in lavish parties. It's measured in the lives you touch, the positive change you create, and the quiet peace you find when you are true to yourself. Chloe and Mark had chased an illusion, and in the end, that's all they were left with. Ethan had built something real, something that would last. And in doing so, he had found a happiness more profound and more enduring than any fortune could buy. His victory was not in their downfall, but in his own quiet, triumphant rise from the ashes.